In Ois Beis, the Rebbe is going to explain that perhaps the evidence that the Rambam brings from the Pasuk, it just says, Vayera v'nishloisha anoshim. How is it that in the middle of seeing and meeting with the Eibishter, Vayera Elov, how could he be seeing other people? And the Rebbe brings the halacha from when you read the Shema, when you daven Shema Esrei, you're supposed to be fully focused on Hashem. The fact that Vayar, that he saw them, that alone should be evidence, the Rebbe says, l'chayre of what the Rambam means. Still, that would not explain why not bring the very clear evidence from the continuation. Let's look inside. Base. As it pertains to the proof of the that it so as far as the proof, we can say from the pasuk by Arvin Nishloisha Noshim as Gedolach Nosher Chulu Yeshleimer L'Chayra. So L'Chayra we can say as Leutner Rambam is the Raya from the Etzem Riyah Shloisha Noshim. According to the Rambam, the proof is from the fact that he saw three people, three men. In a matzah from Vayera Elov Hashem, when you're in a situation, Hashem appears to you. We passed. How does it fit? We passed this. How does it fit as Beis Maises or Avram Kukun, that at the same time when Hashem is by him, he should be looking under Zen and see Shloisha Noshim, three men. Zen Besima slave to see, it's not just as they went by. He saw, paying attention. How do we know? Maybe he just saw them because seen them, so he ran towards them. So that means that he paid attention to them. How is it fitting b'shas men shteit lifnei Hashem when you are standing in front of Hashem? Dav doch zayin mushlo yader tenua. So it should be, any movement should be negated. Balachas kama, any movement at all, and certainly how much more so, you should not be giving attention, sima slave, to give attention to a mention, to a human being, or to epis an ander zach, to something different, when the Eibishter is in front of you. And where do we see this? We see this in the halacha. When you read Shema, you can learn it out. You're reading the Shema, you're not standing in front of Hashem. Hashem is not actually in your presence, you're just reading it. Here, and we know how important it is to be tightly focused on your Shema, and also by the davening of the Rebbe will bring down Obimekol Shikein Fun Kriya Shema, and this is a foretory from reading the Shema. Vos Krios Darv Zayin Bekavonet. When you read, it needs to be with intention. Be'emo u'biyira bereses u'bezeya. As the Gemara says, with awe, with fear, with trembling, with sweat. This is all expressed in the Gemara. Never discussed in the Ha'aretz over here, the exact languages here, but generally understood that a person needs to be reading Shema with a tremendous amount, a tremendous level of awe and fear and sweat and trembling. Why? Val men leint ksav. This is from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. Val men leint ksav hamelech al bnei medinose, because you're reading a document of the king for the people of his country. The Shema, it tells you what the Hashem wants for the. So when the king is talking about that, and it needs to be like new, as new. So which means it's like a new instruction coming from the king. So all the people of the country have to stand in a level of awe in front of the message. That's Shema. That's as far as reading the Shema. Similarly, is also when we do the Amida prayer. Since a Yid needs to see himself as if the divine is resting opposite him, the Shem is in the present next to him. So he needs to see that. At that dan filun, he needs to feel then as he would be standing in front of the King of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Is there din? He's standing. Is Davnei Shemon Esrei? Yeah, you're standing in front of God. Is there din as der Torah nit mafsik sein for kein shum zachi? The law is he's not allowed to interrupt for no matter. When darf stehen avdik hamamor needs to stand like a servant in front of a master. On kein shum is not to make any movements. Ein losus mimkoima. You can't move from your place. You have to stay still and stay in one place when you're davening Shemon Esrei. The Amida. Allah, so this is even by a Yid davening, reading Shema and saying the Amida. Allah has come by Avram. So how much more so by Avram? Was sein Oimed lifnei Havaya. The fact that he was standing before Hashem was not hidden; it was open. Is given by Fnachin Go Live Isla. This was the most revealed way and elevated way. Beniden de Dan, and as we're discussing over here in our case, is doch given nit aksab or nit ki'ilu. It was not, as the Alter Rebbe writes with regard to the Shema when the writing. And it's as if it wasn't, it was nor Vayera, Elu Havayim Mamish, Hashem appeared to him. Is wie kommt es, as bei Isu Sho, so beim sein Vayar, v'hine goyim. So how is it possible they should see, as it represents the Gimel Anoshim, that he saw the three men? So that alone is the fun gufi zaraya. So from this itself is evidence as g'doy lachnos as erchem ha'kabolos b'nei Shechina that inviting the guest is greater than greeting the divine. Wissen die kachachnos as erchem zokt on Shechina, because you know that the divine is telling you why is it greater, because that's what Hashem is telling you. The Shechina Aziz Gidoyla, it's greater for Nakbolos B'nei Shechina. That is the will, and that's the desire that the Shechina wants. That it instructs as Gidoyla for Nakbolos B'nei Shechina from receiving the Shechina is the Riber B'Shas HaKabolos B'nei Shechina. And therefore, at the time that he was reading the Shechina, is Avram Mafsik, he interrupts, and he sees the people because that's what the Eibishter wants, because inviting the guest is greater than Kabbalah's B'nai Shechina. Okay, so we have an evidence that's proved, but what's the reason why we should not bring the clear evidence from the Gemara, in which it says, before she tells Hashem to wait and he runs? As bleibt aber the Shaila Vos is their time. The question remains, however, what's the reason was that Rambam is Meshana from the Raish Gemara? Why is the Rambam changing the proof of the Gemara? Why does he bring a different? Why does he have to bring something different than what the Gemara says? The Pshita, as the Raya from Vayar v'hinei shloisha anoshim is nit mevuriya, that's obvious. This is not a more clear, as quoted before from the Yad Malachi. Sometimes when you have a clearer proof, you'll bring that. But this is not more clear than the other one. This is not as clear as the proof that you have in the Gemara. So l'cheira, the question is on the Rambam, why does the Rambam, even though we understand now, we explained what the reason is, that it makes sense that there is a reason over here, that what the Rambam means to say is because how does Avram see angels while standing before Hashem? That means that it's what the Eibishter wants. But the Gemara brings a different pasuk that he actually ran and he invited them and told Hashem to wait. So why does the Rambam change from the proof of the Gemara? And the Rebbe is going to attempt to give another answer that the second pasuk is not so clear that it's talking about Hashem, that he meant Hashem shouldn't pass. And he could be talking to the Malachim, as the Rebbe will continue to explain, which we have no evidence from there at all, because it's not talking about the Shekhinah. But the Rebbe will say that according to the Rambam says that this is Hashem, and therefore the question will remain, as we'll see in the next ice. It seems like we could answer in Masechta Shavuos, zog the Gemara. In Masechta Shavuos, the Gemara says, as der Maimer gedoyle hachnosos erchim yeser mahagabolos pnei hashchina, that the statement, the saying that the greater is inviting the guest and greeting the divine is verbunden mit dem achloikes hatanoim. That's associated to the argument of the Tanoim. See, kol shemes hat murim batoyre b'Avraham kodesh, whether all the names that the Torah uses for Hashem, are they holy? It's talking about Hashem. So when it says over there, Adoi Shem, Vayemer Adonai, so is it talking about Hashem or is it talking about the angels? So the Gemara says, is Koilel Oich Dam Shem from Posuk Vayemer Adonai no motzosich ein beinecha. He says, my masters. So that means that even though it says that, but it's really talking about Hashem. Aleph Daled Nun Yud, not talking about the angels, talking about Hashem. Im no motzosich ein beinecha. That's one opinion. Other the Shem is Chol, or it's a weekday, it's talking about the angels. Because if it's not Hashem, it didn't say this to Hashem, nor he was talking to the angels. As Rashi brings especially that Rashi brings down both of these opinions in his commentary on the Torah. Und the Far bringt nicht der Rambam den Posik, and that's why we can say that Rambam doesn't bring the Posik. Vayomer goimer al no saver goimer, this Posik, because maybe there's no proof that it's not even talking to Hashem. Val deraya derfun, because this proof is not l'chol hadeis. It's not according to all opinions. It's only if we say that he was talking to Hashem, not that he was talking to the angels. Especially according to the view of the Rambam and the Vayera Nevuchim, that he said this to the angel. So the Rebbe says this would therefore not be a good posik for the Rambam to bring, because it doesn't mean that it's evidence according to all opinions, depending what we translate this, meaning Hashem or being the angels. If the angels, we have no proof. But the Rebbe says we can't answer so. That's why the Rambam brings the posik of Vayera Elov, that proof from that, not from this. Because in the Sefer Yad, the Rambam rules very clearly, Kol Hashemis Hamurim B'Avraham Kodesh, that all the names of Hashem which are said by Avram are all holy, talking about Hashem. Avzeh Shenemar, even this posik that it says, Aleph Daled Nun Yud Im No Motzosi Chein Harehu Kodesh. When he says Hashem, Im No Motzosi Chein Harehu, Hashem is talking about Hashem, not my masters, but talking about not the angel, but talking about Hashem. Harehu Kodesh. He says that this is Kodesh, the Rambam. So how could we possibly say that the Rambam didn't want to bring this posuk, because it might mean something else is not according to all opinions? That's the way he rules. So therefore, he should bring down according to what he rules, that this is talking about Hashem. And we can see clearly that he let Hashem wait while he was going to, Hashem wait while he's going to invite the guest. And further, Rebbe tries another way to answer it from the Rambam in Vayera Nevuchim. And the Rebbe says perhaps all this is not a story. The way the Mor Nevuchim writes, this whole thing is not a story. But everybody's not going to accept it because the Mor Nevuchim at the end is not really the way to learn, not in the Rambam and the Pirush Yad, but the Rebbe nevertheless brings down, tries maybe the Rambam writes that all of this story is not part of a story that happened. This is all Vayar. Hashem appeared to him, and in the appearance that Hashem appeared to him, he showed him the whole thing. He showed him the angels. This was all that he saw. So we can't bring a proof that he left Hashem and he went to greet the angels, because this was not really something that Abram did. It's the vision. That was only a vision that he had. Maybe we're going to answer. But if that is a vision, so what about the first part? Let's look inside. Dalet. In Meir Nevuchim, we're still all trying to figure out why the Rambam doesn't bring down the Gemara's clear proof that Abram says to Hashem, wait while I go bring in the guests, and instead brings the posik of that he saw the three angels versus bringing the rest of the more clear, as the Gemara says. So the Rebbe says, Dalet, that the Meir Nevuchim is the Rambam of Vayera. The Meir Nevuchim, the Rambam explains, that this that he saw the three men and also the following, what follows it, is this was all part of the vision, the prophecies. Hashem. This is a continuation. Hashem appeared to him. So based on this, so we could have answered the Dasa Rambam, that according to the Rambam, since it's never really happened, this was also only in a prophecy, is fundam posib by Yomer, when he said, Adnai Goimer al no savir, don't pass, Nitoki Raya, there's no evidence here. Val der Teuchen ha posik is nit a sipur hamura, it didn't happen that he told him to wait. This was just what he saw in the prophecy. This didn't actually happen. So, not oich di amira, but also when he said this, ad gomer al no saver, my masters don't, or Hashem don't pass. When he was saying to Hashem don't pass, it was in his vision. It's part that he saw in his prophecy. So therefore, there's no evidence that you can let Hashem wait, because he didn't let Hashem wait. And he didn't go to greet the angels. This was not really what he did, because they weren't there. Really, this was all in his prophecy. But if we should say so, then also the Rambam's evidence that Vayera Shloisha Anoshim is also part of the prophecy and never happened. They can't say so. While der Posik Vayera Shloisha Anoshim welchen der Rambam bringt der Raya. Because the Posik Vayera Shloisha Anoshim, for which the Rambam does bring the proof, is Lifi Pirusha b'Meir Nevuchim. If you go by the commentary in Meir Nevuchim, that was also in the vision of his prophecy. So if he sees them, he didn't really see them, he didn't really pay attention to them, that was part that he saw. So then how is this proof better than the proof Vayemer, the proof of Vayera Shloisha Anoshim? If it's prophecy, so how is that better than the Al No Saber, which is also prophecy? And if you can bring a proof from what he saw prophecy, so why do we have to bring the pasuk of Vayera Shloisha Anoshim? And if you're going to say, yes, this is all prophecy, but we can bring proof from prophecy. So even though Vayera Shloisha Anoshim is part of his vision, that didn't happen. So we can bring and we still bring a proof, because in his vision he saw Vayar, means that there is an interruption in his presence of Hashem. So why don't we bring the prosik later on? As if from Mara Nevuah came and bring that you could bring a proof. So the proof would be, was der Eberste beweist, Azam Maref in Welkos is Muchach. Because the fact that the Eberste shows such a vision, as Gedoylach Nosorch Mach Goabolos Pnei Shechina, that is greater than Nosorch than receiving Shechina. So that itself becomes the evidence for this, that it is greater, even though it's B'mara Nevuah. So the Eberste showed it. So, okay. So if we can bring that proof just because Vayera Elov from the Nevuah is the Chadraba, Damut is mistaber to bring in the Raya Dafke from Posik. So then it's logical to bring the evidence specifically from the Posik, Vayomer Adonai Goymer al no saber, or Vayomer Hashem al no saber, because that's very clearly speaking to Hashem and saying al no saber. So you see from the Nevuah that the Eberster is making such a Nevuah, that's very clear instruction. The Rambam, the Rebbe brings down, is dort in Mevayer. The Rambam explains there, as their posik, Vayera Elov Havaya is their klal. When it's Vayera Elov Havaya, that's the general. Von dem posik, Vayar, and from the posik, Vayar v'neshloisha, Anoshim Nitzovim, and then that is on the Pirut HaNevuah. That starts the details of this prophecy, starts with Vayera V'nish Loisha Noshim. Un Vayera Elav Hashem. So that's the Pirut, that's the details of the Vayera Elav Hashem, the Pirut of Vayera Elav Hashem. Hischil levaer, he begins tzuras haharois hahu. What was the shape that he actually saw? Ba'omar niseshetchila rosh leishanoshim chulu. So lefizeh vibald as vayar v'nish leishanoshim is gemen b'mara nevuah. Since vayar v'nish leishanoshim, it was in the prophecy. Is doch in dem nicht talking shum ondait wegen der Hadofe von Achnosos Euchem legabe hakabolas pnei hashchino. Over there is no pointing to, there is no learning from there that there is a betterment, that there's advantage to invite the guest before the Shechina. Vibaldiri is given anoshim is nit mafsik dakabolas pnei hashchina, because that doesn't interrupt the pnei hashchina, because he's still prophesizing. This is part of the prophecy, so it doesn't really interfere. He's not leaving Hashem because he's still there with Hashem. Nor there. Vayar v'hine goimer dos gufis the nevuah. That's part of the prophecy. Vayar Elav Hashem hagbolas pnei hashchina. So this would even not be at all, because this is part of the Shechina's vision. Mashenkin the pasuk vayomer Adonai goimer al no saber. That's not the actual, that's already a story that is happening. Is vibald as that Ebersterotim does baviz b'mana nevuah. This is the Eberster showed him that he is saying al nosabed. That first part, vayar v'hine shloish, that's part of the vision. There's no interruption over there. But later on, within his vision, he sees Hashem and the Ebersterotim that was bavizim b'mana nevuah. Avram zok zum Eberster al nosabed. He shows him, Eberster, Avram is saying to Eberster, don't pass. That's part of his vision. Is those bola lamed that's gedolas chnosos erchemakabolos b'nei then that can come to teach you. So the Rebbe is saying that it's even less evidence from Vayar v'hine shloisha, because that's not an interruption, that's part of his vision. than the subject matter of what he saw over there. So when he sees that Al No Saber Malav de Chavrom is saying that, so that's a lesson maybe. So we can learn that better to greet the people and let Hashem wait, because that's what he did in his vision. But in the first part, that's part of the prophecy. So why would the be evidence? So the Rebbe says saying that this is part of the prophecy is not going to help us with explaining why does the Rambam bring the posik of Vayera Nishlosh Anoshim and not the posik al Nosaber. But Bechlal, the Rebbe says Noisev al Kol Zeh. Bechlal is Doicha God Lefarish. This is very difficult to explain. Well, Levair, and to really interpret the Sefer Hayad, Al Pi Pirusha in the Psukim B'Sifrei Meir Nevuchim, based on the way he explains the verses in the Sefer Meir Nevuchim. We're going to explain it in the Torah, in the Rambam, no, in the Yad HaChazon. About as B'Sifrei Hayad, der Motni der Rambam the Minyan Hanal. In the Sefer Hayad, he doesn't mention this whole idea. As is nit gemeint kein Dibur Meise Bepoil, that it was not actually his speech and action of Avram. This didn't really happen. It was all a vision. But the ganze Parsha is given by Mara Nevuah. This whole portion was just in his prophecy, in a vision of prophecy. It doesn't say it is the Rambam. V'oid the Iker. And the Rebbe says the main thing again, but Rambam Didan. The way the Rambam writes by us, Huvel Kamon, as the Rebbe brings it down later on, is Kemat Mefurish, as is given by Poyel. It is almost clear that this actually took place, that this whole story took place in the. And the Rebbe will argue this is not just an imaginary, because it has to be something that we learn. In the Poel Mamish, we're not talking about just an imaginary, as the Rebbe will continue to explain. Right. The Rebbe is going to further explain in the Rambam. The Rambam singles out, as we'll see, the mitzvah of escorting and the Rebbe wants to know why is that singled out, and the Rebbe will therefore bring out that escorting after the actual treating them, with feeding them what they need, shows that you really care about them, which is an essential part of Achnosus Orchim, as the Rebbe will continue to explain. Oisei. That man das verstehen behagdim bir divre harambam in the haloches hanal. So to understand this, we have to first introduce explaining the Rambam's words in these above haloches. So B'Siman Aleph, the Rebbe brought down the haloches of the Rambam in Sif Aleph, Shom. So there's two halachas here. In halacha Aleph, and there in the Rambam. In halacha Aleph, the Rambam says, "Mitzvahs aseh shel divreim levakir cholim." So it is a mitzvah midrabanon from the Rivreim, a positive mitzvah to visit the sick, that and others. And then it says, "Ulalabis ha'orchim." He specifically says, escorting guests. And then it says ulisasik chulu in other matters. So this is halacha Aleph. In halacha Beis, the halacha Beis zok the Rambam. That schar halevaya meruba min hakoil. The reward for escorting is greater than everything else. It has the greatest reward. And he says, "V'hu hachok shechokakoi Avram Avinu." This is the statute, the rule that Abraham established. And that was the path of kindness that he conducted himself. So that basically is saying that the Levia is part of the established conduct that Avraham Avinu did. But then the Rambam elaborates. He would feed those who pass by, and he would give them to drink, and he would escort them. And the Rambam says, "Ugedoylo hachnosas orchim ma'kabolas pnei Shechina." And inviting in the guest is greater than the Shechinas that Rebbe quoted before. So he talks about generally feeding and escorting them. Then he says about achnosus orchim, it's greater than even greeting the face of the divine. Shenemar Vayera v'nishloisha anoshim, as the Rebbe started the Sicha. And to escort them is even more than bringing them in. How do we see? So the Rambam says, Amru Chachomim. To the Chachomim sages say, Kol shein nemalve kilu shefech damim. Anyone who does not escort the guest is as if he is pouring the blood. So let's now try to figure out what the Rambam is saying over here in Halacha Aleph and Halacha Beis. First of all, in Halacha Aleph, the Rambam separates about escorting more than any of the other parts. And in Halacha Beis, the Rambam actually brings down inviting the guest and escorting them more than even bringing them in. So why would the Rambam in the first halacha just bring down escorting them? And if escorting them is because that's something which you do physically with your body, you walk with them, versus feeding them, which is a monetary participation. So why does the Rambam bring in Halacha Beis feeding them as well, if the point here is to escort them? Let's look inside. Darf man verstehen, so we need to understand. For was sagt der Rambam Halacha Aleph in their mitzvahs as shall divreya, when he talks about the positive mitzvah of the Rabbanon, he says and to escort the guest. We should say, and including language in greeting, inviting, bringing in guests, which includes all the details. He singles out only lelavis ha'orchim. It doesn't say anything else. And so, on the surface, when we learn Halacha Aleph, you think that over there the Rambam talks all the kindnesses that a person does with his body, which actually have no limit. Financially, there's a limit how much you have to spend, but physically, there is no limit. So maybe that's why he's talking about specifically about escorting. The pastors learn, man. So simply we learn as in der Halacha der Rabba wegen der Mitzvah Seshel Shel Divrayim, was is verbunden mit Gemilas Chsodim Shebegufen, that he discusses those parts which is a Mitzvah Esse that you do with your body. As the Rambam writes, Levakir Cholim, to visit the sick, which is something you do physically. You go to visit, L'nachem Avelim, to comfort the mourners. Those are the halachas that the Rambam is discussing here. And that's why escorting them is something you do with your, physically, with your body. As he concludes in the first halacha, this is the kindness that you act, which you do physically with your body, which that doesn't have any amount. As opposed to the part of achnosas orchim, was by state for Michael Mashke sein der orchim, which consists of feeding, giving to drink the guest, is an inyan beikar for gemilas chasodim b'mamoyne. That's mainly an idea of acting kindly monetarily. Und das hat ashir, that has a measure. Und mit der Rambam is mevayer the mechiluk in Pirush HaMishnayis, as the Rambam explains the difference in the commentary of the Rambam, the Mishnayis, that financially, how much, there's a limit, how much money you have to spend on this. But physically, there's no shear. So that's why this is why he talks about escorting versus bringing down the general mitzvah of achnos tzorchim, because the discussion here is about physical achnos tzorchim, what you do. Das is aber can be maspi. That's not sufficient because in halacha aleph we understand, but the Rambam continues in halacha base. He does bring down also the act of a continuation, the act of feeding the guest. In halacha base, zog the Rambam says in halacha base, as the chok shechokake Avram Avinu, that what is the rule that Avram Avinu established is koilo, so he includes Maichil Oivich V'rei Drachim Amashkoisam. He fed the way passerbys and he gave them to drink. Biza brengt them to the extent he brings on this of feeding them and giving them to drink, this statement of them, that this is greater, this level of accepting the Archim is even greater than Kabbalah's Pnei Shechina. But based on the above, Asdor etzich wegen Gemilus Chasodim Begufay, that here we're discussing about Gemilus Chesed that you're doing with your body. That's the discussion over here. So this is not a separate halacha talking about two separate achnos zorchim. This is talking about the same halacha base is a continuation of halacha aleph, talking about the same achnos zorchim that we were talking about in before. So how come over here he brings down also the achnos zorchim from feeding them if we're talking about bodily? Wie kommt da rein der Inyan von Achnosis Erchim b'Memoinus? So how does it fit over here, the Achnosis Erchim monetarily? So the question is, that doesn't seem to fit here. That if the Rambam would gemeint, a little trouble here with the we're having problems over here with the camera. I'm not sure what's going on over here. Um, problem here with the picture, so I'll just let it without the picture, and we'll just continue learning the Rambam as it is. Not sure what's going on over here, but we'll just do the best we can. Yeah, let's see. Oh, why is this? Ob der Rambam wohl gemeint nur a Reus bringen. Meiles halvoyo kshelatzmo. If the Rambam just wanted to bring out the advantage of just walking, the escorting on its own, hat gedacht sagen, then he should have said, Vu achok v'nohag. He should have said that is uh, the chok. Not sure. Something is really off. Well, Loshna Rambam, if the Rambam will gemeint not a risk bring myself if he just wants to tell us the advantage of escorting on its own, not part of achnos zurchma feeding. That's the rule he established, and he was accustomed to escort the guest of Yetzbei. Or minimally, he should have said, after he fed them and he gave them to drink, he escorted them. To emphasize that we're talking about the advantage of escorting the gemach chesed of the body. Rambam is mashma. But the Rambam's language is mashma. He's not saying you fed him so that you can walk him. He's not bringing down the feeding them so that, and later on you walk them. The language of the Rambam is mashma, but this is part of it. That all the details of achnosis orchim are important. Also that you feed them and you give them to drink, that's part of achnosis orchim. So why did he single out Tachla in the Halacha Aleph Halavoya? And it's very difficult. As the Rambam brings the Prota Dvorim, that he brings the details about Achnos Zorchim, not as Achdoma, only as introduction, in order to bring out even more the advantage of escorting. The escorting them is even more than inviting them in. Befrat, as their maimer was bringt b'seifa halacha. So maybe he just wanted to say that so he's bringing down. Oh, there's also feeding and bringing them in. And then there's more by Levim. So he's not really meaning Hachnosas Orchim as an animal of itself. Ubefrat, especially the Rebbe says, it's hard to explain that this is not a part of what the Rambam is talking about, as the Maimer Vosebring B'Seifa Halacha. The statement that he brings the end of Halacha, Omru Chachomim Kol She'enim Malve Kilu Sheifich Domim, if you're not escorting it as if you're pouring blood, is Madgish that emphasizes on the very strongest way the necessity and how great the idea of escorting is. So it's all all difficult to say that the Rambam is just bringing down Hachnosas Orchim to tell you about the escorting them is more than taking them in. He gives already a very powerful explanation of that. So basically, why is the Rambam singling out escorting them? And then he talks also about feeding them and giving them to drink. How do we reconcile all this?